to generalize it, the common fraud in employment-based petitions does track back to whether the person really has the claimed experience, and the overseas verification is a great mechanism to verify that, whether they have the education they claim to have, whether they're going to get paid what they're supposed to be getting paid, whether they paid a fee for the immigration application process, which is prohibited. If the employer happened to get a labor certification, it's one of the categories that requires a labor certification. Is the beneficiary actually working in that area? Because the whole purpose of getting that labor certification and that visa was to work in an area that's short supply or an underserved area. So to come in and work and then have the petitioner send you to another city or location is contrary to the whole statutory intent and the economy and the whole labor market. So it's significant. And I do also recognize that the beneficiaries don't always know what's going on either. So sometimes it's the petitioner who has an agenda that the beneficiary is unaware of. So they petition to get them over here, but then they use them for different purposes or at different locations, or maybe not even pay them what they're supposed to pay, have them perform some other duties, or not even employ them full time. We have an issue of benching and they're not working full time, they're working part time as needed, they're doing other duties, working for other employers. That's not what the law or the regulations require. So, it's a cross between fraud, non-compliance, those kind of issues. But the outright fraud, they don't have the experience to perform what they're supposed to perform. They don't have the intention to even show up or go there, or if they do, they weren't going to be there a long period of time. But these would appear to many to be lower level fraud issues. When you add all these lower level fraud issues, that's what really destroys the integrity of our legal immigration system. One of the challenges in undertaking the anti-fraud initiatives in a non-law enforcement benefits agency that is also under quite a bit of pressure to process applications quickly and responsively. And when you insert steps that require you to undertake additional activities, you are in fact slowing the process down. So we as a benefit granting agency, the CIS, owes it to our customers to be responsive to their needs and to provide the benefits to deserving and eligible applicants in an expedient, reasonable manner. But we also owe it to this country, including national security, but especially the integrity of our legal immigration system, to ensure that we do not grant benefits to individuals that are not entitled to them, particularly those who pose a threat to national security and public safety. Now that was a challenge. To begin, we really had to get a handle on what type of fraud exists. And what I learned, we developed what I also refer to as compliance review programs, where you take this sampling approach that we engaged in benefit fraud assessments, but we also applied it in other forms for compliance review purposes. And I'll give you an example. In the religious worker arena, when we learned the fraud was the primary two types of fraud, they didn't exist, or if they didn't physically exist, and if they did exist, management wasn't familiar, so it was a fraud. We realized that with our limited resources, particularly in CIS with FDNS, that we couldn't really possibly conduct site visits on all those people. So we came up with a program that we partnered and leveraged with the private sector, where we engaged a contract with an agency that had experience doing background checks. In fact, most of the employees that did it for these companies were former police officers and special agents, had an enforcement background. But we didn't really need the enforcement background, and we didn't need immigration experts to go out, visit a location, and determine whether it is physically in existence. Okay? And then the second fraud, to go inside and ask questions that pertain to that business. We didn't need an immigration expert there either. We could provide the exact questions, the checklist, if you will, and please inform us of this. Now, keep in mind, this is just an administrative compliance or quality assurance tool, because the contractor can do it much more inexpensively than hiring government workers and then having to hire cars, and then you have all these other issues with resources and overtime and salaries and training and all that. So it's much more inexpensive, and you can get the information you need. You're verifying information that was provided on a form that is supposed to determine eligibility. So it really isn't immigration expertise. And that worked very effectively, and what that allowed us to do was to engage our limited resources. And as we grew FDNS, we only had like 100 officers the first couple years, and then another 100 a year or so later. And over a period of 8 to 9 years, we were able to go through the budget process and get, I think by the time I retired, it was up in the 900 range. But also keep in mind that we have FDNS officers now, at least one, in every single CIS office that is almost in every state. So, we have over 100 offices. We also started to expand overseas because we found an essential tool is to verify documents and alleged events overseas by having officers overseas that could do that. So it is truly a quality assurance and compliance tool that if anyone was to ask me, what would you do to really try to detect and identify fraud in a government agency, and you had limited resources, I would say benefit fraud assessments and ongoing compliance reviews. And you have to continue to do those. So even if we were to have immigration reform, the two tools I would apply in immigration reform, which is absolutely essential, is benefit fraud assessments, particularly on the high-risk immigration applications and petitions, and post-adjudication compliance reviews. Because we have found in the double-digit fraud rate arena over a period of 3 years, the compliance reviews had a very significant deterrent effect. And once the community, whether it's the business community, the immigrant community, or the legal community, is aware that should you get an approval, there's also a possibility or knowledge that a certain percentage of those approved cases are likely to have an CIS, whether it's an FDNS officer or a contractor or someone else, knocking on your business door or your residence, confirming that you are in fact working where you're supposed to be working, or you are in fact living as man and wife like you reported to be doing. They're essential tools, and you need that. It lowered double-digit fraud rates, the 33% religious worker fraud rate over a 3-year period. And we changed the regulations and actually required a site visit before we even approved the petition. Lowered that 33% fraud rate in the single-digit arena. Also decreased the volume of applications.